Hello plant lovers and welcome to my channel. It's Matthew in Melbourne, Australia, not Melbourne, Florida, although I wish it was sometimes. But anyway, I now post every week and I grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne without any humidifiers or grow lights or heated greenhouses, just indoors or outdoors or not at all. So if that's of any interest and any use, do hit subscribe and follow my very amateurish journey. I must stress the amateur because I really know nothing. Everything that I've learned has been through experience and reading things. And the reason I started the channel was that I did find it really hard to find information about things I could grow in my climate. Hence, here I am trying to put it all together for you who might be in a similar climate. Having said that, plant lovers, let us now break my cardinal rule about cold, cool, intermediate and look at this. This, plant lovers, is a Dendrobium, but it is Dendrobium secundum. I'm not sure you can see that. Anyway, Dendrobium secundum, sometimes known as the toothbrush orchid, which I don't find to be that attractive, but actually the flower does remind me of a lot of native Australian flowers like grevilleas. But anyway, that's beside the point. This is Dendrobium secundum. First thing about it, it's a species orchid. This is as it occurs in the wild. That's the first thing to bear in mind. So the second thing to bear in mind with a species orchid is it is really easy to learn about their preferred or natural environment and then try and replicate it for yourself. And this, plant lovers, is where I'm here to say I've now broken my cardinal rule because this is a warm to hot grower and I live in a temperate environment. However, how can I justify this rash purchase? Well, firstly, I just loved the flowers. It's sort of unlike anything that I've really seen in the orchid world. It's such a bizarre right angle and I don't know, the shape of it was just really intriguing. And then looking at where it came from, I thought, oh, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. It's reasonably warm inside. Let's give it a good Aussie go. And look, it's bloomed. So let's go to the beginning. Firstly, species orchid, it's a Dendrobium. Dendrobiums we know and love. Perhaps we don't, but I do. So this one is an epiphyte and its range is really huge all the way across Southeast Asia. So countries like Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, the Philippines, all the way across there. So a wide range of habitats and in reasonably dryish forest, which is either semi-deciduous or not, which gives you a clue about the light it needs. But the pictures I've seen of this Dendrobium, it is literally clinging to the bark of the tree. So its roots will be in the fissures of the bark and all the water that might run down the bark is the water that the orchid is going to draw upon. The same with nutrients, it'll be catching nutrients that are trapped in the fissures of the bark. So it's quite a tough and exposed environment, not dissimilar though to many other orchids, but that does give a clue about what it's going to like. So you imagine it is clinging to the trunk of a tree, it's getting dappled lights, most likely in winter, depending exactly where it's growing, it's going to get slightly more light. And it's a monsoonal climate, so it's going to be quite dry in winter and then much moister in summer, but this does come from reasonably dryish areas. So in fact, that is not dissimilar in some regards to some of the Australian hardcane dendrobiums like Kingianum and Speciosum that I grow here really well in Melbourne. The only difference being this one is slightly warmer, doesn't like those cold temperatures. Anyway, so I read all of this and thought, oh well, what have I got to lose? I've never seen it before, never seen it since. Not particularly easy to find in Australia, and that is always, it's a bit of a red flag to a bull. It's like, yes! If it's not that common, let me give it a whirl. But I realized that in our house and in everyone's house, I imagine, you can create microclimates within the space. So some parts of your house are going to be cooler and brighter, and some parts are going to be warmer and brighter. So for us, we're in a two-story house, the heat rises, and the staircase area is north facing, has indirect bright light most of the year, stronger in winter, and it's always quite warm. Whereas directly below that is at least 5 degrees Celsius cooler than upstairs. So I winter the cooler orchids downstairs like Miltoniopsis and a lot of Oncidiums and Phalaenopsis, and the warmer orchids like this stay upstairs. So in winter the minimum nighttime temperature is not quite as low as downstairs. So even without equipment, you can actually create or find spots that have really quite different temperature ranges in spring, summer, autumn and winter to suit slightly bigger range of orchids than you might think. So this one for me is growing indoors all the time. I could very well, and I might, depending on space, put it outside in summer. Outside for me though, it means it is covered so it doesn't get rained on, so I can control the watering, but it will have breeze and sun and wind and all that jazz. And I just feel it's a bit of a nicer environment. So I might well summer it outdoors, winter it indoors. So some things that I've read about this, and which is kind of common sense to some degree. A lot of epiphytic orchids like to be quite tight in their pot. I mean, most orchids do to some degree. So this one, I have chosen the smallest pot that the root ball would fit in. It's terracotta because I'm a terracotta pot kind of guy. Aesthetics, environmentalism. The water evaporates really quickly from terracotta, which is a plus and a minus, depending how full your glass is. For me, it's a plus because it means the medium dries out reasonably quickly. The roots are never sitting in damp medium and a damp environment, and that evaporation causes a little bit of humidity around the orchid, all of which I think are pluses. The minuses are, of course, exactly those same things. It dries out really quickly. So in summer, if you've got orchids that don't like drying out, it can be a little tricky. You've got to keep your eye on the evaporation and the dryness of the medium that your orchid is in. And talking of medium, plant lovers, like most orchids, a free draining loose mix for this epiphytic baby. And for me, that is medium-sized bark with actually quite large pieces of perlite, a little bit of charcoal, a sprinkling of mycorrhizal fungi, which stimulates healthy root growth and assists the plant extract nutrients from the soil, and 1 or 2 granules of a slow release general fertilizer, and literally 1 or 2, not half a teaspoon. So that's the podding medium. So general care, this Dendrobium, like lots of Dendrobiums actually, likes strong-ish light. Not direct lights, but a lot of my Dendrobiums do get direct early morning sun and then filtered light, which I think is fine, or bright indirect light. Either way, this one is higher on that spectrum of its light needs. So light. Next thing is watering. So where this comes from, it has dry winters, quite dry winters. So what I received this, probably in early winter. I repotted it immediately because, you know, it's a bit of a habit of mine, which is fine. And essentially then kind of left it. I watered it maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks, just a little, and I let it completely dry out between any subsequent watering, obviously. But really, I think it's the type of orchid you could, depending on your climate, really leave all winter with just about no moisture. And when I did water it, it was literally just a little, just to moisten slightly the area around the top of the pseudobulbs. And because it's a hot, warm grower, I really had low expectations. Anyway, I left it in a bright indirect spot. It was warm, I didn't water it, so I gave it tough love, and ta-da! Look what happened, it bloomed. So as the weather started to warm up, I started to water it a little more regularly, and a real drenching, so the water would pour out of the bottom and then allow it to dry out completely between subsequent waterings. And that's what I do now. It's spring and it's going through its growing cycle and flowering cycle. And in those waterings, about once every 3 or 4 waterings, I'll use a diluted solution of a liquid orchid feed, and that could be anything, whether it's seaweed based or a flowering based mix, or it is a generic orchid based liquid fertilizer. And I always dial the mix down to at least 1/8 of what's recommended, so there's just a hint. It's just like showing the tonic to the gin. I think overfeeding can be a problem. And so the growth habit you can really see quite easily. This one was a seedling, and I think you can see the original seedling bulb in the middle, and then it's grown exponentially new growths. So I think perhaps we have got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 years of growth. So this is a 3rd year growth, I think, and it is blooming. So it's from seed 3 to 4 years to flower, which I don't think is that unusual in the orchid world. So the other fabulous thing about it is that, as you can see, the bloom emerges from the very top of the cane. It's almost like one of those retractable pencils coming out, and then it bends down and you've got the flowers. Interesting. As you can see as well, it is deciduous, so the flowers emerge on the old growth, which have no leaves. Fairly typical to lots of other Dendrobium habits. And then, as you can see, these fabulous new growths here, and the leaves are just beginning to turn which means they are going to drop, which can be frightening and alarming, but as you can see, that's its natural cycle. And then what we can see here is the new growth just emerging. So in fact, the plant is showing us all the cycles of its being. We have the deciduous stems that are flowering, last year's mature canes where the leaves are just about to drop off, and this year's new growth, which will mature over this 12-month period. Next year it will drop its leaves, and the following year will bloom. And then the other thing is that I've got another little flower spike coming out at the top of this cane. And the name Dendrobium secundum I was intrigued by, and I can't really find any explanation for the meaning. Secundum in Latin sort of means in accordance with or following the practice of. So I wonder if it refers to the fact that the flowers open at the back and they sort of travel down the length of the inflorescence, so that the back ones open, die, and then they kind of, move down. I don't know. Maybe that's what the secundum is referring to. So the blooms, as you can see, are this beautiful pink. They don't open completely, but they form this really beautiful mass. And then the flowers at the back die off as the ones sequentially down start to open. And as the plant gets bigger, I think that these spikes ultimately could get quite long and have quite a large amount of flowers. So it gives you quite a long bloom time, obviously, because you've got this sequential opening of the blooms as the spike progresses. Then I have this other spike here, which will replace this one. So I'm going to get quite a few months of flowering out of it. And it's quite striking. It's quite sculptural, isn't it? Doesn't look like any other orchid I've ever seen. So it's a striking thing to have. And I have to say, quite low maintenance. I have read there's a faint fragrance. And I'm here to tell you, there is not even a faint fragrance. And maybe it's just my example. Maybe it's just not warm enough or sunny enough, or you don't feel like fragranting. But anyway, this one has not a skerrick of scent. There we are, plant lovers, Dendrobium secundum. I bought it on a whim. It's a little silly because it really perhaps shouldn't work in my climate, but it seems to be really happy. I don't think it would have bloomed if it wasn't. One of those tough love dendrobiums, as long as it's bright, if you forget to water it for a month, it's probably not going to die. So this is a great orchid if you travel a lot. And I am looking forward to it becoming a bigger specimen with amazing flower spikes from each of these longer canes as it starts to grow up like the best of us. There we are, plant lovers. I hope you've enjoyed our little tete-a-tete with Dendrobium secundum. I do post every week, so hit subscribe. I am a rank amateur. As I've said, take nothing that I say for gospel. These are just the musings of my own learnings, and I look forward to seeing you next week with another orchidy adventure.